All right, we are live. Welcome to the Moment Makers podcast. We've
What's up, guys?
got we've got a special episode. We've got Matt Stevens. He's going to be talking about kind of his experiences in life, mental health. He's got a really cool job where he deals with another side of the mental health that we haven't really talked about yet. So we're really excited to get into that. Um, just want to plug the website real quick, sparrowcloth.com. Use podcast 10 to save 10% on site wide. Let us know what you think about the episode in the comments, reviews in the iTunes podcast area. That's the best way to help us grow the platform and reach more people. So we'll get into it. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, guys. How are you guys doing today?
Oh,
I'm
I'm doing
great.
pretty good.
Good, good. Glad to hear that. Yeah. It's
Cool.
been a busy morning for me. I've been up for a couple hours now. We're recording at 10. I've been up since 4. It's the usual day for me, though. So it's expected at this point.
You're a trooper for that one.
Yeah, definitely had to change my typical schedule. I used to call myself a morning person at 6. Now it's 3:45. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about in the previous episode. I'm not a morning person at all, but I've been pushing myself. I'm more of a like 9, 10 o'clock type person, but we're actually getting up from between 6 and 7 o'clock. Gotta push past it.
Yeah, I got that has to be difficult for you. I mean, even though it was only a 2-hour difference for me, it was definitely noticeable that I had to adjust to that schedule. So I feel you.
Yeah, for sure. So we were kind of talking a little bit before. You just kind of like want to describe basically what's your experience. You said that you were an addiction counselor, so like, what does that entail?
Okay, so I work in Martinsburg Institute, or in Martinsburg, West Virginia, at the Martinsburg Institute as an addictions counselor. So in my job, I work with clients that have had experience with opiates mainly, but have had experience with other illicit substances, and they're prescribed methadone. So it's methadone maintenance treatment where they have a supplementary substance that they take to allow them to not experience withdrawal symptoms, but also be able to cope with things as they are able to develop a more stable lifestyle. So as they progress through the program, they learn to start to have confidence in themselves again. They can work on things like obtaining driver's license, getting employment, building a stable social life around themselves. And I get to walk alongside these people every day in group sessions, individual sessions, and everything in between.
Oh, cool. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So with my experience, I've actually a mental health professional. So it's kind of similar. I've worked with clients that have had drug addiction, but we mainly focus on the mental health aspect. So essentially, what we'll do is we'll connect with programs such as where you're working at, and what we do is relatively the same thing. We make sure that they can have their everyday needs met, basically help with their everyday skills, hygiene, social, whatever they need. And basically, the program that we put them through is basically the same thing where it's basically voluntary. You come in if you want to. If not, you don't have to. But the requirements that we have is that you have to stay stable with the medication that our psychologist prescribes, and then stick to the program that basically was custom made for each client. So with the addiction counseling, do you guys basically have like a what we call is like an MCAT? So well, not MCAT. It's basically kind of like a system that we sit down with the clients. We gauge their mental activity, whether they are fully comprehensive or partially, as well as their mental health uh, in general, talking
Okay.
about if they have any paranoias or anything, or if they have schizophrenia or anything like that, and then we base our program off of that, and then the goals that they want to meet personally. So it's like for you guys, do you guys actually set up a program where they talk about goals they want to personally meet, or is this something that's already a preset program that they have to follow?
So our methadone treatments facility is mainly centered around client-centered therapy. So any of the goals that they set are the goals that we try to achieve with them. When they come into
Right.
the intake process, they've set at least an overarching goal for the entire time that they're there. It's either to obtain stability, to get their lives back on track, or to potentially be off of all substances in general. So, with that one being set as the main goal, the entire time they're here, they have treatment plans that they abide by. Every 90 days, they work on something new. And it's never a um, very surmountable goal. It's something that is realistically achievable. So, if they have thousands of dollars of fines to pay off in the process, then they're going to work on paying off a $500 fine so they can get their driver's license back. If it's to address their mental health stability, it's to follow up with appointments to see if they can get into a place. If they need more social support, it's trying to figure out what hobbies they can do realistically within 90 days.
I
So,
think that's a really awesome. So we've talked about that before on the podcast too, about like setting achievable goals. I think that's something that everybody can benefit from.
Yeah, for sure.
Because what it does, and I don't know if that's the reason that you guys do it, is it's achievable. So
mhm.
you set a small goal, you meet that goal, and you kind of compound on that success. Um, and I'd imagine that's why they do it with them, is because they have an addictive kind of personality anyway.
Yeah.
So having kind of redirecting that sensation into something where they can set a goal, achieve it, and then have um, that success in that moment of achieving that goal can be somewhat psychological to help them combat as well as
Absolutely.
the methadone's therapy. But we've talked about it just in a everyday sense of life. People that have lower that don't have a good grip on their mental health, setting an achievable goal. Like, it literally is as small as getting up in the morning and getting out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, absolutely.
it's something that you can set, compound on, and build on. And I think that's a really awesome thing to see that they're implementing there. Probably for more the reasons than one, but it's something that everyone can take from, even if it's just that small piece from this podcast. It's something people can take from. So I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely beneficial because you walk alongside these clients as they're going through some of the worst parts of their life, trying to recover when everything's getting thrown at them negatively. And you
Mm-hmm.
can show them that they've made some small progress in different ways. That's something that they can hold on to as they learn to better themselves. I know going through my own depression in the past, it was always the littlest victories that made the biggest impacts on my recovery. You know,
Mm-hmm.
just um, so for them, for anyone that goes through recovery, and even for just anyone in general, especially with mental health, the smaller the goals that you can reach usually end up being bigger than the bigger goals because you look back on the little victories and see them as the big moments in your success.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Because even with the clients that we have, some of the goals that we set is basically just like, making sure your hygiene is up to par on a daily basis, or like going out and talking to people. Because some of the people that we have, they suffer from schizophrenia with a degree of paranoia. So what that means is that like they'll have this delusion that people are out to get them, or they'll imagine, like, let's say we go to Jewel and they'll full on have a delusion that the cashier is attacking them or something. And one of the goals that we'll make is just being able to be around other people. Like for other people that are not really struggling with any type of mental illness, that's like an easy task. We were around people all the time. But for somebody that's dealing with mental illness, they having that type of a goal will be actually huge for them. So we always try to reward that, no matter the smallest goal. And part of that, like one day, one of my clients, we all we did was go to Costco, walk around for a couple minutes, and then went back home. And that was a big victory for him and for the program itself, because for many years he couldn't even get out of the house. I think the record even said that he didn't leave his house for like 10 years. Like he barely saw the sun. So it can get pretty intense, but just setting those small goals. And now he's going out every day. He's going walks by himself, and it's just taking that one little step that's going to make the biggest progress later on down the road. It's just that foundation that's being put down in that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's always the littlest victories. Like, we can reiterate on that one. Yeah, it's not surprising that people that come in for opiate addiction, about 90% of them have some sort of mental disorder, whether it's anxiety, depression. We've had bipolar clients, we've had
Yeah,
schizophrenic clients. But addiction just goes hand in hand in those situations because it helps you cope with life in a way, but
exactly.
it causes you to go down a rabbit hole of worse habits.
Mm-hmm.
So just being able to walk alongside people and see stability on their dose and not to see them use for 4 days is a big victory.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's definitely. I'm glad you actually mentioned that because most of the clients I've actually worked with have had a history of some type of addiction, whether it was alcohol or whether it was some type of drug addiction. They've all had an experience at one point or another. And that's one thing that one of these psychologists sat down with us about because we usually have like weekly meetings and we brief on all the cases. And one thing that was very crucial that we all had to understand as part of the staff is that these people are just they're not bad people. It's just that they were taken down a road that was unfavorable, and because of that, sometimes it actually does trigger mental health issues. Others more genetics that we've had people that had the chemical imbalance, but then others due to past trauma, which could have been treated through therapy, have now become more of a chemical imbalance because they relied so much on drugs that actually altered their functionality. And if for people that are listening, I want you guys to understand that it is okay to get help. It is
Uh,
okay to admit that there's something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest things for people to realize in all walks of life is that everyone has some issue going on. Um,
Exactly.
100% of people could benefit from having counseling. Being a counselor, I know the value of counseling, and I have a counselor.
Hmm.
There are so many things you go alongside people with that if you want to be able to stick your neck out and help someone out or just stick your heart out there a little bit for them, have some empathy or some sympathy. Every time you give of yourself, you take away from yourself. So you have to have some counseling. You have to take care of yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with that statement because I've noticed that people that want to help, like we all know those helpers, they want to give up, give and give and give, but they forget that it's very important to have time for yourself. You can't help others if you can't help yourself first. You got to be prepared. And I don't know if they did for you, but for me, when they actually did my interview, they actually made sure that I had a personal therapist because the burden can get pretty heavy. You start to get emotionally connected into this, and it can take a huge toll on you. And you can come home with such a burden that you want to like just sit there and cry and everything, and it's okay to cry, but you also want to make sure you're doing it healthfully, where you're releasing all of that and being able to talk to somebody so that you can keep growing and making sure that you're taking care of yourself, so that you can actually impact those people's lives. So it's very crucial to take care of yourself, and as selfish as that sounds, but if you take care of yourself initially, then you can be an asset to somebody else's life
Well,
somewhere down the road.
I don't think it's selfish to do that. I think that your self-care and your mental health is important to help other people with their self-care and their mental
Yeah,
health. You know,
Absolutely.
exactly.
it goes hand in hand, and kind of going back to where you guys were talking about um the people, we kind of talked about one side of it with the mental health and addiction, but they kind of go together. So people that have addictions can develop mental health issues, or people with mental health issues can develop addictions. It goes hand in hand, and I think that's why what we're doing is important. Finding tools and talking to people, and at the very least starting a conversation on the topic so that people know that it's not something they have to deal with alone, so that
Hmm.
they can have the encouragement to go talk to someone, because that doesn't make them a lesser of a person because they're talking to someone about what they have going on. Because like Matt said, I mean, everyone could benefit from talking to someone. It's not that people with the most severe cases of mental health can only benefit. If you deal
Yeah.
with a small stressful thing at work, you can benefit from talking to someone. That's why most people come home and talk to their wives or their spouses about their workday, because it helps them decompress and get rid of the feelings that they're holding on to. But in the talking about that, still your spouse or whoever you're talking to is going to need to decompress at some point because they're taking on all of your stress. So it's a constant cycle of talking to people and clearing that mental health. And I think us talking about tools and things that you can do to help with your self care, and again, it's not selfish to have self care. It is really vital in people kind of understanding what mental health is, how they can overcome it, and how they can kind of deal with it and cope with it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, what
And
I
yeah, and I would say like speaking of self-care, Matt, like what do they usually have you do to kind of stay focused and make sure that you're clear and ready to go for work and helping others out?
Well, when I went in through the interview process, they made sure that I was, number one, relatively mentally stable. Number two, that I had a certain level of support around me, that I had um, people that I could talk to, whether it was a counselor, whether it was just people that I trusted. Um, and then also just to establish healthy coping skills. Okay, so if we are active dosing clients for 4 hours, and then we have the next 4 hours to write down notes, we would also have time for supervision, where we would sit down with our clinical supervisor, talk through any stressors if they occurred throughout the day, and then at the end of the day, just learn how to decompress effectively. And these are things that they could teach you, but they're also skills that you should be able to develop on your own. For example, after work, I typically take about an hour and a half for my drive home, and then when I'm home, to just take a shower, to breathe, to meditate on the things of the day, write down notes if I need to outside of work. I always leave work at work. I never bring it home because that's just an extra stressor for my family, and they don't need that stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of the same experience that I was having. Sadly, because of like state regulation, I always had to keep up with my paperwork so that I can actually have the insurance, stay up to date. Because here in Illinois, if anything is covered under insurance, you have to have the proper paperwork for description purposes. And part of that was me initially having to bring my work home with me, and I realized really quick that was a big mistake because you really do need that break, and you can really overwhelm yourself super fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to be able to disconnect from it readily and quickly. And there are even times during the day that the first 4 hours you're at work from 5:30 to 10 o'clock, for me specifically, it's seeing people left and right some days. There are
Yeah.
some days where there's multiple hours where you have nothing going on. And then there's days where you have two 1 hour group sessions and you're seeing people for the entire hour in between. And you just have to figure out how to take 10 seconds to just breathe, relax, detense in a way that's effective to you so you can keep moving on with the day. And that can be sort of my depressive background, that can be a little bit of anxiety, but most of that is figuring out how to cope with stress on a moment to moment basis.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because kind of like what my days used to look like was since I'm very similar to what you're doing, where it's kind of more offsite counseling. It was just constantly like running from one house to the next house to the next house. And one thing that my boss just consistently drilled into our heads was that we had to make time for ourselves, whether we pull over to the side of the road or do whatever the case may be. Um, we just have to make sure that yeah, my beloved dog is here again. Um, but just making sure that we had time to ourselves to focus on everything and focus on ourselves and recollect ourselves because you never know what you're gonna walk into. One day I remember walking my very first day, this lady did not take her medication, and because of that, she was having like massive episode. So like she was hallucinating, and this is my first day, so I was not ready for that. So we walked in, she's already having full blown episode and having a breakdown, and like after that, I felt so emotionally, mentally drained. It was just insane. Like it's just I had to take time to myself, and then I really understood from that point forward why my boss was always encouraging us to just take a couple minutes, collect yourself, and then like don't bring work home, because then that's where it really starts to deteriorate. And then you always have to have your therapist.
Yeah, it's definitely necessary to make that number one, that separation, not only from work and home, but just for in your situation from client to client, you do have that drive. If it was me personally, I would drive in silence because that's a way that I can recollect myself and just breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you have to figure out what works for you, and the fact that your boss has tried to reiterate that in so many different ways, but was willing to do that from the beginning to say, okay, this is what you can expect.
Yeah. Hey, Brendan, so I know like you don't really work in the field, but I know like part of the importance of having your family and everything is making sure you're not bringing that stress home from work. So for you, what are some ways that you kind of like decompress and actually just take a breather, just for those that may not be able to relate to the field, but understand that part of mental health is also being able to separate work from home and then allowing yourself to have that free space so you can actually calm down.
So I have an hour drive to and from work, so that helps a lot with not bringing anything home.
Hmm.
Um, and for the most part, the job that I do is not that stressful. That is to say that I do have stressful days, um, but for the most part, it's not too bad to the extent that I need a lot of decompressing. Um, but having an hour drive home from work does help, just because it it helps me decompress and kind of refocus where my mental state is. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Matt, on a different note, as far as like your personal experience, you had mentioned that you had suffered from depression. So you want to kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, there was a time in my life when I had to relocate. I actually lived in Virginia Beach, which is where I met Brennan. I was down there for about 2.5 years helping out a church down there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, it got very mentally taxing, just some of the experiences at the church, unfortunately. Luckily, I'm at a much better place now where I actually appreciate the people around me and they lift me up, which is great. But um, I experienced a difficulty down there that caused me to have to move back with my family. And when I did, I was moving back into my house at 24 years old without a job and a little bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
I went through all sorts of individual frustrations with that because I went from having something to do every day of the week to having nothing at all. So I moved home and tried to get a job right away. And I didn't realize how much mental and emotional stress that living down there had put on me until 2 days into the first job I had detailing vehicles. I could not stop crying the entire day. There was no reason for the tears. There was no reason for me to absolutely feel that way. But I think looking back on it, the environment that I was in just seemed hopeless. It was just people just working towards something without any hope, just seeing that it was a dead end job and that that's where they were going to be. And I guess I internalized that in a way that caused me to just start weeping uncontrollably. So I had to quit that job. Then there was a couple weeks, if not months, where I did nothing except for occasionally work alongside my dad, who does construction work. And in that
Mm-hmm.
time, I spent a lot of time by myself. I spent a lot of time in prayer. My religion and my relationship with Christ definitely made it easier for me to get through it, but at the same time, it wasn't addressing the issues at hand. There was a lot of frustration I had with myself. There was all these voices in my head telling me that I was worthless, I was pointless. Look at the fact that you moved back home. You're not doing anything worthwhile with your life. And it's not like they all came on at once. It took weeks for each of these voices to start speaking to me. And it just reached a point where I remember feeling like I was a waste of space. Everything that I could do was not going to be of benefit to anyone, and I may as well just not exist. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a low point in my life. I remember just experiencing these feelings of not even dread, but just blankness. There was no joy. There was no hope in anything. I had nothing to aspire for. I was just living day in and day out. And I remember it was um, one day when I was trying to make grilled cheese, I couldn't remember how to make it. And I remember the thought process in my head being so absurd that I finally realized, okay, this is not the way normal people think. Because it went from, you're so worthless, you can't even make grilled cheese. How can you be so stupid? You can't get through these things. Nothing you're ever going to do is going to mean anything. It's just like one thought led to another, led to another, led to another. Um, but realizing how absurd those voices were was my fight out of it. I can go more into detail with that if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
So, I remember just thinking, I'm like, really? Grilled cheese? Like that, all those thoughts spiraling out of control just because I can't make a sandwich and some tomato soup to have as a dipping sauce because that's what I love to do. Um,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah. But that was one of those moments I can look back on and say, okay, these thoughts are absurd. This is a
Mm-hmm.
lie. This is the first time that I could recognize something that was being taught in my head was a lie. So I remember turning on my phone. I'm like, nope, this isn't going to be the truth today. I Googled how to make grilled cheese. I'm like, oh, that's right. Butter. That's what I couldn't remember. It was just butter. Um, and then I proceeded to make grilled cheese, turn the skillet on, put some butter down there, put the bread on, put some cheese on, another slice of bread, flip it over, brown it. Made it look good. My sister looks at it and says, I want one. I'm like, yes, you do. These are going to be delicious. So I make some grilled cheese tomato soup. She's like, that's the best sandwich I've ever had. I'm like, you're damn right it was. uh, and it was those moments, excuse my language, but it was
No,
those
you're fine.
moments that just really brought it to my head that, like, okay, these aren't true. The voices telling me I don't have influence, these voices aren't true. The voices telling me that I'm not good at what I do, those aren't true. These giftings that I have, they're not going to amount to anything. They aren't true. And I had to fight each of those individually over time. It went from not being able to make a grilled cheese to being able to work a job stably, to being able to go back to school for something that I thought I could do, to playing guitar and serving a church again, to stepping up into different positions and stepping into roles I wouldn't have imagined. It went from being depression to optimism. It went
Well, and I
from,
think, and I don't mean to cut you off. We don't have a whole lot of time left, and I want to kind of touch on a few things that you talked about. And I think one of those, so when you kind of came to that realization that, this is for lack of a better term, this is stupid. You have you were kind of talking yourself down a rabbit hole, and when you realized, oh, I'm being illogical, this is stupid, me thinking the way that I'm thinking, it kind of compounded into you achieving certain things after that. So you recognize where you were, and then from that success you kind of compounded on it, and you were able to go back to school and to get a job, and kind of compound on all of those things. And I think that's a true testament to everything that we've been talking about on the podcast the last 6 weeks, 12 weeks,
Yeah.
to setting a goal, achieving it, recognizing where you're at in your life, and knowing that you can take steps to change. I think another thing that was really beneficial to talk about was, you mentioned your relationship with Christ, and how it helped, but it didn't get to the root of what you were dealing with. And
Mm.
I think that's really important because a lot of people write off religion as a fix all, or that because you have religion, or you have God, that you can't have those issues. And
Yeah.
that is by far from the truth. Um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of churches take the route of, oh, say a prayer and you'll be fixed, and that's not true. Um, for a lot of people, it really is a chemical imbalance in their brain. For a lot of people, it's an emotional response to things in life, and to some people, it's just something that they've developed over a period of time of feeling a certain way, and they can't handle what they're doing anymore because they don't know how to handle it because they've never been taught how to handle it. Um, so I think you mentioning that was a benefit. Do you have any more that you can kind of touch on with that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things I can draw from that. Going back to your first point, talking about being able to set goals to get yourself out of it, I got to tell you, one of the things that helped me was having
Yeah,
people alongside me as I set those goals. You know,
and we've talked about that too. See,
yeah,
all the stuff that we've talked about, it's really cool to see it put into practice.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, we've talked about setting, removing negative influences from your life and putting positive influences in your life to help you grow and build on. You can continue. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Um, So yeah, I mean, that was one of the big steps. I mean, I moved back here and really didn't have that many people in my life, but what I did have was the family that I was living with. And I'll forever be grateful for the push that they were able to give me. They didn't understand depression, so they didn't know what to do moving forward, but they were still there to try to coax me on to better things. And yeah, as far as the relationship with Christ thing goes, there are some situations where medicine can help, and there are some situations where those prayers of faith can help, but you have to be willing to embrace Christ for who he is, for the power of it all. And if by the prayers of faith you don't feel healed, then it taints your relationship with God. It causes you to have all of these doubts and think, okay, he doesn't have the power I think he does. One of the reasons I had the depression for as long as I did is because I had to learn how to fight through it. I had to learn how to fight different battles, and that's something that I've understood this entire time I've walked through my faith is there are some situations where I have to take the first step for God to honor the rest of it. And for me, it was working out depression. That was one of the big ones. Was just looking at what I could do to bring myself out of the situation because a lot of it was my mindset as well. But when you're blinded by depression, you don't see that. Unless you have someone alongside you that can clearly identify that within you, you're not going to see it as clearly.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, considering like everything that you guys pretty much covered, it's like you just have to understand that you gotta realize what works for you. I mean, and the way that you were able to kind of rationalize yourself in this situation and you were able to talk yourself down, that's always the first step. So, like my big thing, and Brandon and I have touched base on this before, is just understanding like the first step is acknowledging that there's something wrong, you know, and then just going from there, taking the first step, whether you're talking to yourself, trying to organize your thoughts, or if you really do want to go ahead and talk to somebody and figure out if it's something that you can do through therapy or through some type of extra activity, or if you really do need that medication, then taking the steps to meet with a psychologist. But it's always important to understand where you're at and understanding that there has to be something that needs to get done, because one of the things that is like a big misconception is that people are just like, oh, with time, it'll just pass. But you never know to the extent of the case. With some people I've met through my job as a mental health professional, they had a traditional family where they believed, oh, well, you just need to drink more water, or you need to do this, you need to do that. But sometimes they just need to be heard, and sometimes that requires actually getting professional help. And I want to continue to encourage people, like, you don't have to undermine your feelings. You don't have to feel like that you're weak if you want to get some help, or like you're having trouble acknowledging that you're struggling with something. It is perfectly okay. Everybody has their struggles, just like you said before, Matt, that everybody's dealing with something to some degree.
Yeah. I think one of the best skills you can have is realize that you're not alone in these things. Everyone has a different struggle that they're going through, but everyone can justify getting help for what they need help with. You can't expect to get through life alone for multiple different reasons, but anytime you need help with something, don't be afraid to reach out. I think that's the
Yeah,
problem with most of male cultures. We like to do everything alone, and we don't develop worthwhile friendships or relationships anymore because of it. So I
for
would say
sure.
get the help, grow with people, walk alongside them. It's going to make life a lot better.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to stop too. Because I know you've got to hop off, and I think that's a good way to end it. Matt, I appreciate you sharing some of your experiences and some of your not only experiences in the field, but your personal experiences too. Um, it'd be cool to have you on again in a couple months just to check in and see how you're doing, how work is, and all that. Um, But we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks again for being on the podcast, Matt.
Of course. Have a great day, you guys. Nice talking
You
to you.
too. Thanks. Well, we're going to wrap this up here, guys. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review down below. 5-star review and a comment for a chance to win a free shirt in the month of February. We've got, I think, 7 days left, 8 days left, something like
Yep.
that. So you got a good shot. No one's done anything yet. So be sure to do that. Use podcast 10 to save 10% off on the site, spurcloth.com.
And guys, go ahead and follow us on Instagram. Just keep up with us, Journey of Eli and Brendan Toller, and then Moment Maker's Life. We're going to continue to keep spreading the awareness and showing support. And if you guys want to keep on looking into what Brendan and I are up to, just go ahead and follow us on Instagram. And you can actually, we'll do Q&As. You can interact with us. And basically, it's just you guys can actually request an episode specifically that we can actually address. So if you guys have any topics you guys want us to cover, let us know, and we'd be more than happy to cover it.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll see you all on the next one.
All right, guys. Remember, keep making those moments.